What does God want a man to look like?
Toxic masculinity is an interesting phrase, and people use it a lot.
There's nothing definable good about masculinity. Masculinity, by very nature, is toxic. That's grossly misguided.
But that's what the world is ascribing to that. But that's not who God says men are.
I think it's good to say men and women are different, and God has put some unique things in men and women that we need for each other.
If you're a single woman, and I'm just encouraging you strongly, if you don't find someone who's secure in their relationship with God, they're going to ask you to carry the burden to tell them who they are. And you can't do that. You will hate that in 4 years from now.
Today, we're talking about 3 of the major myths about masculinity. We're going to tackle the lies that so many of us as guys choose to believe, and we're going to combat them with God's truth and God's design for what it means to be a real man. So, guys, I'm really excited to talk about this.
I'm excited to hear Joanna on this.
Well, I'm curious already. Do they choose to believe it or are they told it?
I think it's both.
Okay.
I think, you can't believe something unless you were told it. And I think people are,
I don't know.
men are told this a lot, and then they choose
I
to
feel
believe it.
y'all just went very philosophical. Wait, what? I couldn't even follow that. I was on my joke. I was still laughing at myself about Joanna telling us, and then y'all are on to
I think this is a big one for today, and I think a lot of our cultural problems can stem from this particular topic about masculinity. A lot of our cultural and identity stuff has to do with the fact that we have a very narrow image of what men and women's roles and identities should be, and when they diverge from that, it sends people into crisis. And so, I think it would be really beneficial to actually tackle this.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, because there's two polar opposites. One is, I feel like sometimes I see in culture there's no differences.
Yeah.
And then on the other side of the spectrum is a hyper stereotyping of differences, I guess, in a sense. But I think both are equally.
Yeah.
Like there's no difference between men and women can just do anything that women can do anything men can do. Men can do anything. It's like, that's like, there's no differences on that one.
Yes.
Which is,
that's
an
wrong.
extreme.
right. An
I think
extreme
it's wrong.
and wrong. And then you've got the other, which is like this hyper stereotype. So anyways, yeah. That's interesting too.
And that's what we're tackling today. So the first lie that we're tackling is there's only one way to be masculine. This is a lie that a lot of guys have been told and believe, because there's this set list of things that make up a man. I think there's a very narrow, men don't cry, men are aggressive, men conquer women. I'm not saying that all guys believe this, but there is a narrow set of things that men adhere to. What is the problem with having a narrow view?
The problem with that, though, is that, see, it's like anything related to sin. You know, that phrase toxic masculinity is an interesting phrase, and people use it a lot. And what's always interesting to me, there are some men that are toxic, but it's not masculinity that's toxic. There's people who use sex and abuse others. That doesn't mean sex is toxic. So I mean, you have to be real careful that you don't begin to ascribe, again, monolithically to a whole gender, men or women, things that are really about sin. It has nothing to do with, so of course there's toxic men. Of course there's toxic women. It has nothing to do with masculinity, though. Not all men are like that. I've told you guys before, I say this all the time, I've never let my kids say, well, men, or, women are like that.
Yeah.
I'm like, you can't do that. You can't group people like that. You have to talk about individuals.
It's interesting because I think also that's what then the world is ascribing to that, but that's not who God says men are. When sin enters the picture, that's the world. That's what the world is saying, or the world is pulling out of the whirlwind. I mean, I don't know if you guys can relate to this, but the media's job is to make things hyperbolic and all and absolutes. And so, yes, that would be the thing that then shows up in media and culture, because that's the sensationalism, piece of it. And so anyway, I think it's what God says about men, that is different than what the world says about men. And that's the point.
Love that. I love that. And I think that what we have identified in this first thing is, the lie is that there's one way to be masculine. and that tends to swing like, one of two ways. Like, like you said, Jason, is like it's either, there's nothing
You should be
definable.
ashamed of it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, there's nothing definable good about masculinity.
Yeah.
There should be shame about being masculine, and masculinity by very nature is toxic.
Right.
And that's one pendulum, which is like that's grossly
Yep.
misguided.
Dishonoring
Yeah.
of God's good creation of men.
And then you have the other extreme, which is taking some of the virtuous things that God has made unique
Mm-hmm.
in men. And I think we should say that. I think it's good to say men and women are different, and God has put some unique things in men and women that, we need for each other.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And I think that some guys will put those on high, and they'll turn that up to 10. And sometimes it can become toxic in the fact that they're allowing sin to be part of the masculinity.
Yeah.
So it's one thing to be attracted to women, but to objectify
them.
women,
Yeah, totally.
now you've gone too far, and that is not masculine. That's just sin.
Yeah. Well, and anytime you have a conversation about stuff like this too, everybody always has their anecdotes, and it's like, well, not my Uncle Steve or not my Aunt Sally or whatever. And it's like, okay, we're just talking, and you have to at some point to have a intelligent conversation. We're talking on averages here too.
But
Well, and I think that's some of the danger too, is when then other people around you are painting what it should and shouldn't look like, then that's where some of those spoken expectations, I think, are then also put on men, which that's like not helpful
yeah,
either.
suddenly you're insecure, and then that's why I think a lot of people go through identity crises because
Yeah,
I'm
I
not a
agree.
man. I must not be a man.
I
because,
don't meet that hyper stereotyped image. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think you're right. I think it messes with some people. Yeah.
And what I see is, I see that we're looking for examples of masculinity from other people. And I
Mhm.
think the answer is to look for images of masculinity from God. And ultimately, I think it's not looking to the movies, not looking to social media, not looking to the internet in general.
Well, yeah, because that's where identity comes into play, which is, I think we mentioned a little bit ago, is just also then where are you getting your identity from? Are you getting your identity from what the world says about you, or are you getting your identity from your creator who created you to be like in his image and
Love that.
with that unique wiring?
Let me tell you why why we are so susceptible to these lies. The reason we're most susceptible to these lies is because I think one of the fundamental things a man wants is a blessing. In particular, they want it from their father. And we live in a culture where that's almost unheard of today. And isn't it interesting, by the way, that what Jacob wanted to steal from Esau was his blessing? He just wanted he wanted his father's blessing, right? And what does Jesus get in Matthew 3, chapter 4? Maybe chapter 3, chapter 4. He gets baptized and he hears the words of his heavenly Father say, "This is my son. I am so well pleased with him." Listen to what he said. It's an affirmation. When you don't know who you are, who you are, that's the blessing. You're my son. You belong to me. You're strong. You're great. You will go looking for the blessing in a lot of different places, right? You'll look for everybody else to affirm those things in you. And most of the time in very dark places. Trying to prove yourself worthy, trying to prove yourself worthy of the blessing that you never got. The key to not getting tripped up by these lies as a man is to go to the heart of your heavenly Father who can give you the blessing that your earthly father never did. And even if your earthly father did give it to you, your earthly father has given it to you in a flawed way. My own dad blessed me by the life he spoke into me, but if he were sitting here, we could also tell you all the flaws. So there's only one voice that can give you the blessing that you long for the most if you're a man listening to this, and that is the voice of your heavenly Father who speaks over you what he spoke to his son, Jesus Christ. "You are my dear son in whom I'm well pleased." You need to memorize Ephesians chapter 1, 3 through 8 if you're a man. You know, that even before the foundations of the world were laid, God loved me and chose me in Christ to be united with him. Like, These are blessing statements. You get that right, some of the other proving stuff begins to take its right place.
Yeah.
So I can be vulnerable because I already know who I am. I can be weak because I already know who I am and whose I am. I can be, I mean, you see what I'm
Yeah.
saying?
Yeah. It's so much to do with identity. And
Yeah.
and we want to know who we are. And I think men just have, bought into I am what society has said is most important. So next thing is the second lie is the self-reliance is the only way. So this is one that Jason you were starting to hint at is one of the lies that guys believe is you have to be self-reliant. You have to pick yourself up from your bootstraps. It's you versus the world. It's, toughen up. This is told by men to young boys from birth.
You know what we should do? We should create a tension you need to live in as a man with each of these, because you should do all those. I agree with all those things, but not at the expense of dependence and vulnerability. And so again, it's like these are three tensions you have to manage and live in as a man. And it's when you choose one or the other that probably is like you're not living in the fullness of who God made you to be. So so say some of the things that you said again, Chad, about what did you say about self-reliance?
Self-reliance.
Yeah, that's a pretty good character trait. Like
Mhm.
that like in and of itself,
Absolutely.
when you are raising young boys and girls, so this is just like, and they fall down at the playground or whatever, you're raising them to get back up again on their own.
And I think some of it is not done enough
Yep.
to tell young boys like it's okay.
Yep.
You'll be okay.
You'll be fine.
There is something good about rub some dirt in it.
Yes. There's nothing, because that's life.
But does it go too far?
It can. This is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
It's like the tension. And I think it's better to frame it as, I don't want to pit one over the other. I don't want anybody hearing this also to go, you shouldn't work towards self-reliance. There's a lot of men out there right now who are still boys. They're little boys because they're still dependent on their mom, for whatever, or if they just transferred their mom to their wife.
Yeah.
And so they got to have that in order to be happy or whatever. You're still a little boy.
Yeah.
And so there is an aspect of growing up means you become independent and you become self-reliant. Now, the shadow of that, again, is to the point of excluding others. This is where it gets wrong. This is where it
Mhm.
becomes toxic. This is where it becomes sinful. And all I'm trying to say is you need both. You need to be fiercely, so the way forward as a man is fiercely independent and reliant, self-reliant in the sense of self-ownership. That's what I mean by reliant, self-reliant. I just mean you take ownership of your life, while at the same time vulnerably open.
Yeah.
With the people who are closest to you and need you to be emotionally available to them.
Yep.
Both. You have to do both.
Well, I just think we're in a weird place in like our cultural timeline, if you will, because I think generationally, so much of that matters too from what your family of origin did. And so if you're like, think about your dad or your grandfather, like when I think about that, like my grandfather, like he had to be all of those things. And that was the circumstances that he was in. So then that's then how he went and molded like his son, or pulled back from like, hey, I faced a lot of hard crap. Like I want to be able to give you a different life than like what I experienced. And so then now even I think just in the generation that I'm a part of and now raising kids in the next generation, like I think there's just I don't necessarily know how to describe it, but I think culturally those things ebb and flow based on the generation like
Yeah.
that you're coming from that then influences the generation that you're going into.
Yeah.
And cuz I also think like I even see, like among moms where it's like, "Hey, let your sons climb and fall and but like there's also the other side of that where it's like, no, like we want them to be careful and like, so anyway, I think that it just is also very dependent on the circumstances you've been a part of and the influences that have like raised you
Totally.
in the generation in which you were raised in.
It's just the extremes. It's absolutely the extremes that we tend to go to. So self-reliance is a good thing, but when you isolate yourself and say like, I have to suffer alone.
Right. Exactly.
When you go like, I can't tell her that I'm dying inside. I can't tell her that I'm depressed. I can't tell them that I need
Mhm.
help.
I mean, you think about it like this. I've got some of my closest friends are soldiers. I've got some very dear friends who are soldiers, and some of them are my age, and I know, and then others were much older who fought in different wars. The strength that served them best in conflict is the thing that kills them at home, and that's it's the self reliance, the sense of uh, going to that place in order to survive, what made them excellent soldiers is the very thing that when they get home they can't relate to the family anymore. They can't do all that. So my point is, this is the tension thing, right? And so I don't want one over the other. I want to learn how to be both. I want our men to go and take ground in the business world, in the marketplace, take ground in your communities, take ground with your families, like go advance things, build things, move things forward, and be emotionally available to your wife, and
How
be
though?
emotionally, by being vulnerable, by choosing to do the thing that terrifies you the most, which is I'm scared. Um, looking her in the eyes and telling your kids, "Hey, Dad needs a break right now because I've got a lot." We don't do that. I don't do that. That's hard to do, but that's being emotionally available.
I have a friend of mine that said it like this, and I thought it was really genius. He said, I don't want to teach my kids to be tough. I don't want to teach my boys to be tough. I want to teach them to be resilient.
And
And I
tell me
was
the difference.
and it took me a second to realize the difference. Tough is very put up walls.
Okay.
Put up walls. Like, so to be
Tough as a
tough means you
shell.
don't feel.
Okay. Yeah. 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 Okay.
Tough
All right. All
tough
right.
is like you put up walls and nothing gets through. When
Mm-hmm.
you're just
Mm-hmm.
tough.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, and that's a soldier tough when it's like I don't feel things because I'm so tough, I'm so calloused. But resilient means I can still overcome them, but I still feel them. And
I
it's okay
feel
to
them
feel them.
deeply, but I'm not
I'm not broken
paralyzed
by
by
them.
them. Not broken by them. That's good. I like that.
So it's like it's not saying that I can't handle things. Oh, I can handle plenty of things. I will provide, I will protect, I will do all of those kind of things. I'm resilient in
Mm-hmm.
that. But at the
Mhm.
same token, I will also feel. I will also, you know, break down. And the thing about David is
Yeah.
he didn't just break down to God. I think we could easily just go like, well, of course, in your prayer life you can be emotional because no one sees it. He broke down to other people. Like I think of who was the a prophet that came to David and said like, "Hey, you got some
Nathan.
sin in your life."
Yeah.
Nathan,
Yeah.
and David was like, "Bah." There
Actually,
was
that's a great story. That's in it's in one of the Samuels. I can't remember. We can look it up. But Nathan, you're right. He's caught. David's caught in sin, and Nathan confronts him, the prophet. And there's a moment of actually he demonstrates his resilience and vulnerability, because most men at that moment, when you're confronted with something, you have a choice. You can put
Mhm.
up the shell and kind of like, I don't want to hear it. I'm not going there. Or you can take it in, process it, repent, and grow. That's actually resilience. So I like that that nuance between toughness and resilience, because I want resilient. I want to build resilient men
Mhm.
who are able able to hear from a prophet about sin in their life, and they don't shut down. They, like David, grow from it.
Anything apart from a relationship with Jesus isn't going to be a good isn't going to be the fullness of the thing.
Yeah,
And so even like with King David, all of the things that he went through and like dealt with, or just even that like resilience, like had he not been a man after God's own heart, like then even his own self-reliance isn't a good thing, or like isn't the
yeah,
most full thing.
yeah.
Self-reliance or independence or whatever, like connected to God and a relationship with Jesus, that's also then when like you're still not on your own.
If you're a single woman and I'm just encouraging you strongly. If you don't find someone who's secure in their relationship, I don't mean perfect in their relationship with God,
Mhm.
because no one is. I mean actively pursuing it. They are going to come to you. They're going to ask you to carry the burden to tell them who they are. And you can't do that. It is an impossible burden for you to do. And by the way, you'll get resentful. Matter of time. It's cute. It's cute when a little boy needs your attention for the first year. You will hate that in 4 years from now, because you're ready for them to stop asking you to be their sole source of affirmation. They need it from somewhere else. And the only one who can give it to them ultimately is like, I mean, ultimately, you understand, like, is the one who created them. So just be careful about that, and don't settle.
So let's wrap up here by talking about the and we've already hit this a lot, so I think we can go quick on this. The last lie is guys shouldn't cry. This is all about this feeling. Guys
Isn't there a
shouldn't have
song about that?
feelings. What's that?
Big boys don't cry. It's like big boys don't cry. Isn't that or something?
I think it's big girls don't.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh,
I think so.
oh man, big girls don't cry.
But there is something about like guys don't cry. And I think
Yeah,
this is not to say it's just about sadness, but men have a tendency to be labeled as they shouldn't feel emotions. Any of the litany of human emotion men shouldn't feel. And I think that I see that's I've seen that in my own life, when I didn't want to reveal, my own sadness or disappointment, and in actuality getting that out and identifying it and feeling it was actually very therapeutic for me. So my question is, where does this lie stem from, and why do we believe this is a persistent lie that guys should just not feel emotion? Where do you think it comes
I
from?
I don't know. I mean, I can tell you for me personally, where it comes from is emotions make me feel very vulnerable. I mean, that's the bottom line. So, and I know what happens when I'm vulnerable. I get hurt. So, like, that's the story, right? So,
Mhm.
I mean, at the end of the day, that's probably, I think, uh, I mean, there's when you feel vulnerable, you feel weak.
Mhm.
That's the bottom line. And when you feel weak, you feel threatened. And when you feel threatened, you feel
Totally.
angry and you feel,
Totally.
I mean, all that kind of stuff. So then you're like, anybody who makes me feel that way, I don't like, and I
Mhm.
don't like and that's where it kind of goes. But I think it has to do with the vulnerability aspect. It is silly though to go, I'm not emotional or whatever. I hear guys say that all the time. And that's just such a ridiculous statement, because you can't, you're breathing. So you're emotional. Like, you can't not be emotional. I know what they're trying to say. They're trying to say, I don't express emotions a lot,
Mhm.
but you cannot help feeling emotions, and you suppress them for long enough. And what you do, if you suppress the negative emotions for long enough, what you do is you actually incapacitate yourself to feel positive emotions as well. And I can't, you know what I mean? You don't get one without the other. It's like a snorkel. If I cover up the top, because I don't want to breathe in or breathe out negative emotions, I also just limited my ability to breathe in anything else. So I'm going to suffocate. So at some point, this is why you run into men all the time who are just dead. There's nothing in them.
Yeah.
And it's because they spend so much time not expressing some of the and I'm using negative. I don't think there are negative emotions, but I'm using that in quotes.
Mhm.
Um, that they also can experience joy
Yeah.
Mm.
and
Yeah.
laughter and
I love
peace
that.
and
Walls keep things out and in.
yeah,
Mhm.
yeah,
And I think a lot of times, or at least in my life, like that's only around me, right?
Yeah.
Like I think sometimes that they've also just come from a long line of you're not allowed to criers. And so like I think like we um and like I think research would show this, what we say to kids in their formative years matters a ton, I think, in areas like this. And so, even today, with Finn being an 8-year-old, the more I were to tell him, hey, buddy, we don't cry in our house, like wishards or whatever, you know what I mean? That would signify that that's not an okay way to express your emotions. That stuff sticks, and that stuff sticks early.
yeah,
And
or
then I
like,
also
or that
think,
didn't hurt, or whatever,
right,
all that kind of stuff.
totally. And so I think that again, like we talked about at the beginning, it's like the tension to live in. because I want him to know that he's going to be okay. I want him to know that if you fall on the playground, it's going to be all right.
Resilience. Yeah.
But I want him to be able to cry if it hurts.
Totally. Yeah. Yeah.
And
yeah,
so
yeah.
I think it's that. And then I also think that there's just a piece of like that safety aspect. I know a lot of times, like, we have a very spirited daughter. And so the place she is the most spirited is our home.
Mm-hmm.
And I would like to believe that that's also one of the places she feels safest.
Mm-hmm.
And so then I think in those relationships, especially then kind of with guys shouldn't cry, like, I think that there's a safety aspect that if Kevin didn't feel safe to cry, then like he would keep bottling all of that up. And so just even, what we were talking about a little bit ago, like being able to be with people and safe people around you where expressing what you're feeling is allowed. And I think depending on, again, your family of origin or what you've been told your whole life, then how safe you feel to be able to express that, like, isn't always available.
Totally.
I think to men specifically sometimes too.
And our families need to see us model that. They need to see us model that. They need to see that it is an emotionally, here's how to create an emotionally safe home as a dad is you say, I'm tired. I just need a nap, guys. That in itself is vulnerable because it's also showing them you can take care of yourself.
Or I'm sad.
That's real for me. Like that's a real thing from last week.
You can say, oh, go on.
No, I'm just saying like, but I wouldn't think to make that known to my family in a sense, because it feels like I'm admitting defeat in a sense, like I'm in a tough season right now. They need to hear, but they almost more need to hear me say that because they need to know that creates safety because they're not perfect and they're tired sometimes. And if I don't ever vocalize or demonstrate or model that kind of stuff, they don't feel safe that they can be.
Yeah.
So again, I mean, like, this is just, and by the way, David, Jesus wept, David cried. I've got a list here of people who, in front of me, Jeremiah, the prophets just laid their hearts out to God, bitterly crying at times, and Job and all that. So like there's that whole idea that all we're doing is creating mannequins.
Yep.
Mannequins. King David in the scriptures, he's a perfect example of this. I mean, that guy was flawed in a ton of ways. I mean, but he's also called a man after God's own heart. And he was your warrior poet. He was both. He was emotionally in touch. You can't read the Psalms and not, I mean, he was very self-aware. One of the most self-aware men.
Was not afraid to cry.
No, he wept, he cried, he poured his heart out. He said, God, I struggle with this. God, I'm feeling these things. The psalmists are full of these kinds of I'm in a pit of darkness, God. This is a guy who reflects. And he was a warrior. He's the guy who defeated Goliath. He's the guy who took
He cut off Goliath's head.
Yeah.
We're not talking a meek man.
No. He was a boy at that point. So he's a fierce warrior. You can be both.
Yeah, because I do think this is a modern day construct for men, is that men don't feel emotions and men don't cry. Because if you look at 2,000 years ago, these men were men that, were soldiers. These were men that were warriors. Some of these men were super brave. Some of these men were flogged. Some of these men would literally give their lives for the cause of Christ, like going to get their heads chopped off, kind of martyrdom.
Mm-hmm.
And they were very in touch with their emotions.
Yeah.
And so I think it's a modern construct that guys don't feel emotions. It's like, well, that there's nothing evidence that in the Bible.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
If there's a guy listening out there, what do you recommend for them to be a man after God's own heart?
This is going to sound so ridiculously whatever. You need to go, and I need to go. We need to go we need to go follow Jesus. We need to go look at Jesus. We need to see how did he treat the poor and oppressed. We need to see how he interacted with women. It's all in there.
Mm-hmm.
We need to see how he treated his enemies when he got mad at times.
Mm-hmm.
We need to see when he got angry, how did he vent that anger? We need to see all of that. That's what we need to see. Yeah. He's the perfect man. And he was full of truth, fiery. He was a warrior. He defeated sin in the grave. And he was compassionate, gentle. So both.
Mm-hmm.
We need to go to Jesus, and we need to go, Jesus, make me a man like you.
Hey guys, so the bravest thing I think we can all do is 1, let's not adhere to these lies. And 2, let's look to God for his design for what it means to be a man in today's world. Now, like always, I ask that you like, share, subscribe to the podcast, leave some comments, and as always, now that you're a life changed by Christ, let's live that change out.